Um, Morgoth was wheeling his horse in a wide circle to gain room. Horace knew that he'd swing round soon and charge down on him, using the momentum of his charge as much as the force of his sword to try to strike him from the saddle. Guiding his horse with his knees, he swung away in the opposite direction, shrugging his buckler round from where it hung on his back and slipping his left arm through the straps. He glanced over his shoulders and saw Morgoth 80 meters away, spurring his horse forward in a charge. Horace clapped his heels into his own horse's ribs and swung him back to face the black-clad figure. The two sets of hoofboots overlapped, merged, then overlapped once more as the riders thundered towards each other. Knowing his opponent had the advantage of reach, Harris determined to let him strike the first blow, then attempt a counter-strike as they passed. They were nearly on each other now, and Morgoth suddenly rose in his stirrups, and from his full height swung an overbearing blow at the boy. Horace, expecting the move, threw up his shield. The power behind Morgoth's blow was devastating. The sword had Morgoth's immense height, the strength of his arm, and the momentum of his galloping horse behind it, timing it to perfection. He had channeled all those separate forces and focused them into his sword as it cleaved down. Horace had never in his life felt such destructive force. Those watching winced at the ringing clash of swords on shields, and they saw Horace sway under the mighty stroke, almost knocked clean from his saddle on the first pass. All thought of a counterattack was gone now. It was all he could do to regain his saddle as his horse staggered away, dancing sideways as Morgoth's mount, trained for battle, lashed out with its rear hooves. Horse's left arm, his shield arm, was rendered completely numb by the terrible force of the blow. He shrugged it repeatedly as he rode away, moving the arm in small circles to try to regain some feeling. Finally, he felt a dull ache there that seemed to stretch the entire length of the limb. Now he knew real fear. He knew no way to counter the crushing force of Morgoth's sword strokes. He realized that all this training, all his practice, was nothing compared to Morgoth's years and years of experience. He wheeled to face Morgoth and rode in again. On the first pass they had met shield to shield. This time he saw his opponent was angling to pass on his right side, his sword arm side, and he realized that the next shattering blow would not land on his shield. He would have to parry with his own sword. His mouth was dry as he galloped forward, trying desperately to remember what Gillen had taught him, but Gillen had never prepared him to face such overpowering strength. He knew he couldn't take the risk of gripping his sword lightly and tightening at the moment of impact. His knuckles whitened on the hilt of his sword, and suddenly Morgoth was upon him, and the massive bowed spring sprung in a glittering arc at his head. Horace threw up his own sword to parry, just in time. The mighty crash and slithering scream of steel on steel set the watcher's nerves jangling. Again Horace reeled in the saddle from the force of the blow. His right arm was numb from fingertip to elbow. He knew that he would have to break out of the cycle of battering blows, but he couldn't think how. He heard hoofbeats close behind him, and turning realized that this time Morgoth hadn't gone on to gain ground for another charge. Instead, he had wheeled his horse almost immediately, sacrificing the extra force gained in the charge for the sake of a fast follow-up attack. The broadsword swung back again. Horace reacted his horse onto his hind legs, spinning it in place and taking Morgoth's sword on his shield once more. This time the force behind it was a little less devastating, but not by much. Horace cut twice at the Black Lord forehand and backhand. His smaller, lighter sword was faster to wield than the mighty broadsword, but his right arm was still numb from the parry, and his strokes had little power behind them. Morgoth deflected them, easily, almost contemptuously, with his shield, then cut again at Horace, overhand this time, standing in his stirrup for extra purchase. Once again, Horace's shield took the force of the sword stroke. The circular piece of steel was bent almost double by the two massive strokes it had taken. Much more of this, and it would be virtually useless to him. He realized he spurred his horse away from Morgoth, scrambling to remain mounted. His breath was coming in rapid gasps, and with sweat covered his face. It was as much the sweat of fear as of exertion. He knew. He shook his head desperately to clear his vision. Morgoth was riding in again. Horace charged his direction at the last moment, dragging his horse's head to the left, taking him across the path Morgoth's charging horse as he tried to evade that huge sword. Morgoth saw it coming and changed to a backhand stroke, crashing it onto the rim of Horace's shield. The broadsword bit deep into the steel of the shield, then caught there. Seizing the movement, Horace stood up in his stirrups and cut overhand at Morgoth. The black shield came up just a fraction too late, and Horace's blows glanced off the black beaked helmet. He felt the shock of it up in his arm, but this time the jarring felt good. He cut again as Morgoth wrenched and heaved to remove his sword. This time Morgoth caught the blow on his shield, but for the first time Horace managed to put some authority behind the stroke, and the Lord of Rain and Night grunted as he was rocked in his saddle. His shield dropped fractionally. Now Horace used the shorter blade of his sword to lunge at the gap that had opened between shield and body, and drove the point at Morgoth's ribs. For a moment those watching felt a brief flare of hope, but the black armor held against the thrust, which was delivered from a cramped position and had little force behind it. Nonetheless, it hurt Morgoth, cracking a rib behind the mail armor, and he cursed in pain and jerked at his caught sword once more, and then disaster. Weakened by the crushing blows Morgoth had struck at it earlier, Horace's shield simply gave way. The huge sword tore free at last, and as it went, it ripped loose the leather straps that held the shields on Horace's arm. The battered misshapen shield came fierce and spun away into the air. Horace reeled in the saddle again, desperately trying to retain his balance. Too close to use the full length of his blade, Morgoth slammed this double-handed hilt of the sword into the side of the boy's helmet, and the onlookers groaned in dismay as Horace fell from his saddle. His foot caught in the stirrup, and he was dragged for 20 meters or so behind his terrified galloping horse. Oddly enough, that fact probably saved his life, as he was carried clear of the murderous reach of the broadsword. Finally managing to kick himself free, he rolled into the dust, his sword still grasped in his right hand. Staggering, he regained his feet, his eyes full of sweat and dust. Dimly he saw Morgoth bearing down on him again. Gripping his sword with both hands, he blocked the downward cut of the huge sword, but was beaten to his knees by the force of it. A failing rear hoof took him in the ribs, and he went down in the dust again as Morgoth galloped clear. A hush had fallen over the watchers. The Wargles were unmoved by the spectacle, but the kingdom's armies watched the one-sided contest in silent horror. The end was inevitable, they all knew. Slowly, painfully, Horace climbed to his feet once more. Morgoth wheeled his horse and set himself for another charge. Horace watched him coming, knowing that this contest could only have one possible result. A desperate idea was forming in his mind as the dead white battle horse thundered towards him, heading to his right, leaving Morgoth room to strike down with his sword. Horace had no idea whether or not his armor would protect him from what he had in mind. He could be killed. Then dully he laughed at himself. He was going to be killed anyway. He tensed himself ready. The horse was almost upon him now, swearing away to his right to leave Morgoth's stacking broom In the last few meters, Horace hurled himself to the right after it, deliberately throwing himself under the horse's front hooves. A great wordless cry went up from the onlookers as for a moment the scene was obscured by a cloud of rolling dust. Horace felt a hoof strike him in the back between the shoulder blades, then saw a brief red flash as another slammed into his helmet, breaking the strap and knocking it from his head. Then he was hit more times than he could count, and the world was a blur of pain and dust, and most of all, noise. Unprepared for his suicidal action, the horse tried desperately to avoid him. Its forelegs crossed, and it stumbled and then somersaulted in a tangle of legs and body into the dust. Morgoth managed to kick clear of the stirrups just in time, was hurled over the horse's neck, and crashed to the ground. The broadsword fell from his grasp. Screaming in rage and fear, the white horse struggled to his feet again. It kicked one more time at the prone figure that had brought it down, then trotted away. Horace grunt with pain and tried to stand. He came to his knees, and vaguely he heard the swelling cheers of the watching army. Then the cheers gradually died away as the still black-clad figure a few meters away also began to move. Morgoth was winded, nothing more. He dragged in a vast lungful of air and stood. He looked around, saw the broadsword lying half buried in the dust, and moved to retrieve it. Horace's heart sank as the tall figure outlined now against the low afternoon sun began to advance on him. One long stride at a time, desperately Horace retrieved his own sword and scrambled to his feet. Morgoth had discarded his triangular black shield, holding the sword in a two-handed grip. He advanced. Horace, pain-racking every inch of his body, stood firm to meet him. Again came that nerve-jangling, screeching clash of steel. Morgoth rained blow after blow on Horace's sword. Desperately, the apprentice warrior parried and blocked, but with each massive blow, his arms were losing their strength. He began to back away, but still Morgoth came on, beating down Horace's defense with blow after shattering blow. And then, as Horace allowed the point of his sword to drop, unable to find the strength to keep it up anymore, Morgoth's huge broadsword whistled down one more time, smashing onto the smaller sword and snapping the blade into two pieces. He stepped back, a cruel smile on his face, as Horace stared dumbly at the shorn off blade in his right hand. "I think we're nearly finished now," Morgoth said in that soft and toneless voice. Horace still looked at the useless sword. Almost unconsciously, his left hand reached for his dagger and slid it from his sheath. Morgoth saw the movement and laughed. "I don't think that will do much good," he sneered. Then deliberately he took the greater broadsword up and back for a final mighty overhand blow that would cleavage Horace to the waist. It was Gillen who realized what was going to happen a second before it did. "Oh my God, he's going to," he said slowly, and felt a ridiculous surge of hope. The broadsword began its downward arc, splitting the air, and now Horace, throwing everything into one final effort, stepped forward, crossing the two blades he held, the dagger supporting the shortened sword. The locked blades took the impact on Morgoth's mighty stroke, but Horace had stepped close to the taller man, and so reduced the leverage of the long blade and the force of the blow. Morgoth's swords clanged into the X formed by the two blades. Horace's knees buckled, then held, and for a moment Morgoth and he stood locked chest to chest. Horace could see the puzzled fury on the madman's face as he wondered how the situation had come about. Then the fury turned to surprise, and Morgoth felt a deep, burning agony pour through his body as Horace slipped the dagger free, and with every ounce of his strength behind it, drove it through Morgoth's chain mail and up into his heart. Slowly the Lord of Rain and Night sagged and crumpled to the ground. Stunned silence gripped the onlookers for a good 10 seconds, then the cheering started. "Oh my gosh, he won! Oh, Anyway, okay, well, thank you for listening to Read Chapter 35. If you'd like to listen to Read Chapter 36, then please stay tuned. Thank you, bye bye.